If one sentence could carry the promise of the power of your subconscious mind, it would be this: the private picture you repeatedly accept becomes the quiet instruction your life starts following. Joseph Murphy writes like a preacher, a lecturer, and a practical self-help teacher at the same time. He uses the language of prayer, miracles, faith, and infinite intelligence. But the working center of the book is very simple. The mind does not only observe life. It rehearses life, interprets life, and trains the body and behavior to move in the direction of what it repeatedly accepts. The book asks a simple opening question: what are you rehearsing inside yourself every day? Murphy begins by separating the conscious mind from the subconscious mind. In his model, the conscious mind chooses, reasons, rejects, and directs, while the subconscious mind receives the dominant impression. The conscious mind is like the watchman at the gate. It can say yes or no. It can compare ideas, test evidence, question a fear, and choose a new mental direction. The subconscious mind does not argue in the same way. It works more like soil, memory, habit, emotional climate, and automatic response. Whatever is repeatedly planted with feeling begins to shape expectation, perception, and action. Imagine a person who says every morning, "I am always unlucky," then spends the day noticing every delay, every awkward sentence, every doubtful look, and every small failure as proof. What would you expect that person to feel by evening? The actual result in Murphy's argument is not magic in the cartoon sense. The mind has been trained to search for defeat, and the body and choices begin to cooperate with that defeat. The person may speak more defensively, quit earlier, miss chances, or interpret neutral events as rejection. Murphy would say the outer life is beginning to answer the inner pattern. This opening claim is powerful, but it also needs a responsible boundary. Murphy sometimes speaks as if thought explains almost everything. A careful modern reader should not use that claim to blame people for illness, poverty, trauma, or other suffering. The book is most useful when we apply it to the areas where inner rehearsal clearly affects behavior: fear, confidence, sleep, discipline, resentment, attention, relationships, work, and the meaning we give to events. The point is not that every hardship is self-created. The point is that the mind can become a second hardship or a second source of strength. The early chapters keep returning to one mechanism. The subconscious accepts what the conscious mind impresses upon it with belief. Murphy uses religious language for this, but the practical movement is recognizable. A thought becomes more than a thought when it is joined with feeling, repeated, pictured, and treated as true. The mind then begins to organize itself around that accepted idea. If the accepted idea is, "I am trapped," the person begins to search for walls. If the accepted idea is, "There is a wise next step available," the person begins to search for a next step. Here is the first major contradiction in the book. Many people say they want peace, success, health, love, courage, and abundance, but their private rehearsals say the opposite. They pray for peace while replaying arguments. They ask for confidence while imagining humiliation. They say they want prosperity while repeating that people like them never receive opportunity. They want love while expecting betrayal. Imagine that conflict as one instruction. What would you expect the subconscious to obey? The result is the emotional picture repeated with most feeling. Murphy's language for this is divided mental instruction. The conscious wish says one thing. The emotionalized subconscious picture says another. The stronger emotional picture usually wins. That is why Murphy gives so much attention to prayer. For him, prayer is not begging a distant power in panic. It is the act of bringing the conscious and subconscious into agreement around a constructive truth. In ordinary terms, it is focused inner acceptance. You relax the surface struggle. You choose the idea you want to impress. You give an image. You feel it quietly, as far as you honestly can. Then you stop canceling it with the old fear every 5 minutes. This is why the book can sound repetitive. Murphy thinks repetition is not a flaw in the method. Repetition is the method. Picture a reader who wants better work, but goes into every interview silently saying, "They will discover I am not enough." Would you expect a stronger resume alone to remove that pressure? What actually changes first, in Murphy's view, is the inner assumption. When the reader practices a calm statement of usefulness, worth, and service, the behavior can stop carrying the old fear. The voice becomes steadier. The answers become less defensive. The reader starts noticing preparation, not only danger. The outer event is still real, but the inner climate has changed. The most famous tool in the book is autosuggestion. Murphy does not always use the term in a technical way, but the idea is everywhere. Autosuggestion means intentionally suggesting a thought, image, or belief to yourself until it becomes familiar to the subconscious. This is not empty slogan chanting. It is not pretending that facts do not exist. It is the disciplined replacement of the feeling tone behind thought. The words matter because they carry images. The images matter because they carry feeling. The feeling matters because the subconscious accepts feeling as a kind of reality. Suppose a person uses an affirmation while secretly arguing against it. "I am calm," followed immediately by "No, I am not. This is ridiculous." What do you think the deeper mind receives? The answer is the conflict itself. Murphy would say the dominant feeling, not the decorative wording, is the real message. This is why he keeps telling the reader to relax. A tense affirmation can become another way of repeating fear. A quiet statement accepted at a deeper level can become a new direction. The reader must stop planting one thing and watering another. This sentence is almost the practical center of the book. If a person plants peace for 10 seconds and waters resentment for 10 hours, resentment remains the crop. If a person plants confidence in the morning and spends the afternoon rehearsing social rejection, rejection remains the dominant picture. Murphy's method asks for inner consistency. The conscious mind must choose, but it must also keep choosing long enough for the subconscious to receive the new pattern. Murphy's examples often involve healing, money, marriage, fear, and age because those are the places where people carry strong emotional pictures. He argues that the subconscious mind controls bodily processes, stores memory, and responds to mental atmosphere. Some of his claims are much larger than what a cautious reader should accept without qualification. But underneath the dramatic language is a useful question. What is your mind practicing when you are not paying attention? Is it practicing cooperation or resistance? Courage or defeat? Forgiveness or injury? Service or scarcity? The chapter on how the mind works repeatedly compares the subconscious to a servant of accepted belief. It does not judge whether the belief is good or bad. It carries out the instruction as far as it can through habit, emotion, and bodily response. Imagine a borrowed prediction entering as law. What would you expect the habit system to do? The result is a private rule unless challenged. Murphy's advice is to guard the conscious mind because the conscious mind is the point of selection. Do not casually accept every fear that enters. Do not let another person's prediction become your inner law. Do not treat one failure as a permanent identity. The conscious mind can reject the suggestion before the subconscious turns it into a pattern. A modern reader can translate this into daily practice. When a thought appears, ask, is this a fact, a fear, a memory, or a suggestion? If it is a useful fact, respond to it. If it is a fear dressed as prophecy, do not enthrone it. If it is a memory, learn from it without making it a life sentence. If it is a suggestion, choose whether it deserves repetition. Murphy's religious phrasing can be intense, but the discipline is practical. Do not give emotional authority to the idea that defeats you. The book then moves into mental healing, where its strengths and risks become clearest. Murphy reports stories of people who improved through prayer, changed belief, and a new subconscious direction. He speaks with great confidence about the healing power of the mind. A responsible reader can take the core psychological lesson without turning the book into medical advice. Fear, despair, chronic resentment, and helplessness can harm a person's choices and stress response. Calm, hope, cooperation, and a constructive self-image can support recovery and resilience. But serious illness still requires qualified medical care. Imagine two patients receiving the same practical care. One repeats, "Nothing can help me," while the other repeats, "My body and my treatment are working together. I can cooperate with recovery." Which inner climate would you expect to support steadier action? The result Murphy points toward is the second climate. Not guaranteed cure, but less inner sabotage, more compliance, more hope, and more strength. That is the ethical reading. The mind should not replace responsible care. The mind should stop fighting the care that is already being given. Murphy also teaches that prayer works best when it is not forced. He describes relaxed faith, not anxious pleading. The person who prays while constantly checking for proof may be impressing doubt more strongly than belief. This is why he says to state the desire, accept the answer inwardly, and then let go. In psychological terms, the mind needs room to reorganize. If the conscious mind keeps digging up the seed to see whether it has grown, it never allows the deeper process to settle. One of the book's recurring patterns is the movement from problem to image to feeling. A person facing fear does not merely say, "I am not afraid." Murphy wants that person to imagine moving through the feared event with calm. A person seeking work does not merely say, "I have a job." Murphy wants that person to picture useful service, good relationships, and right compensation. A person seeking healing does not merely deny symptoms. Murphy wants that person to imagine harmony, strength, and cooperation with life. Which would you expect the subconscious to follow? The vague wish or the vivid rehearsal? The result, in Murphy's method, is the concrete image. This does not mean every image is equally wise. The conscious mind must choose images that are ethical, constructive, and realistic enough to guide action. If a person imagines controlling another person, that is not healthy prayer. If a person imagines wealth without service, skill, or contribution, that is fantasy. If a person imagines healing while refusing medical help, that is danger. Murphy's strongest usable idea is not that imagination cancels reality. It is that imagination participates in reality by shaping the person who acts within it. Sleep is one of Murphy's central tools because the border between wakefulness and sleep weakens resistance. He repeatedly advises the reader to take a problem, desire, or prayer into the drowsy state with a calm image of solution. He believes the subconscious continues working while the conscious mind rests. Even if a reader does not accept the spiritual explanation, the practical insight is strong. The final emotional frame before sleep matters. If you end the day rehearsing resentment, fear, and debt, you train the night around those pictures. If you end with release, gratitude, and a clear request for guidance, you give the mind a different assignment. Imagine a person going to sleep after repeating fear for an hour. What would you expect the night to return? The likely result is not deep restoration. The body remains tense, the dream life may be disturbed, and the next morning begins inside the same emotional weather. Murphy's alternative is simple. Quiet the body, forgive the day as much as you can, choose one constructive thought, and let the subconscious receive that thought without argument. Sleep in peace and wake in joy is not just a pretty phrase in the book. It is a nightly discipline. The sleep chapters also connect to problem solving. Murphy tells stories of people receiving answers after sleep or relaxed contemplation. The broader lesson is that the conscious mind is not the only thinking system we have. When a problem is held calmly rather than anxiously, the mind can combine memories, associations, and intuitions below the surface. Many people have experienced this in ordinary life. A solution arrives in the shower, on a walk, or after rest. Murphy interprets that as the subconscious responding to a request. The practical method is clear. Before sleep, do not recite the problem in panic. State the needs simply. Ask for the right answer. Picture the feeling of resolution, not the mechanics of forcing it. Then sleep. Imagine one calm question replacing 10 anxious demands. What would you expect by morning? The result may be less panic and more clarity. This is not a substitute for research, skill, or conversation. It is a way of stopping panic from blocking the mind's own ability to connect what it already knows. Murphy's prosperity teaching follows the same structure. He argues that poverty can become an inner pattern when people resent money, fear money, condemn wealthy people, or repeat that they can never have enough. This part can sound naive if it is read as a claim that poverty is only a thought. It is not. Economic systems, education, health, family responsibilities, and luck matter. But Murphy is pointing to a real psychological trap. If a person identifies with lack so completely that opportunity feels impossible, then even available chances may be ignored or rejected. In Murphy's language, wealth begins as a mental permission to participate in abundance through useful service. The phrase useful service matters. He is not at his best when he sounds like money appears from nowhere. He is more useful when he asks the reader to stop hating prosperity and start imagining contribution. A person who believes, I can learn, serve, and receive fair compensation, is more likely to build skill, speak with confidence, negotiate, save, notice openings, and recover from setbacks. The subconscious becomes an ally to disciplined behavior. Imagine a money choice where a person says, wealth is impossible for people like me. What would you expect that belief to do? The actual outcome is not poverty by magic, but lower courage, lower service, and fewer useful attempts. That person may avoid learning, avoid asking, avoid selling, avoid investing in skills, and resent people who could have been teachers. Murphy wants to replace that identity of exclusion with an identity of participation. The ethical version is not greed. It is permission to give and receive. Murphy also warns against envy and condemnation. If a person condemns what they say they want, the mind receives a divided instruction. I want prosperity, but prosperity is shameful. I want success, but successful people are corrupt. I want recognition, but being seen is dangerous. These contradictions create inner friction. A better instruction is, I can bless the good that comes to others, learn from honest success, and create value in my own way. That thought does not guarantee wealth, but it removes one unnecessary block. Relationships receive the same treatment. Murphy says the subconscious carries assumptions into marriage, friendship, and family life before words are spoken. If the inner picture is suspicion, the person hears accusation in neutral comments. If the inner picture is resentment, even kindness may be treated as manipulation. If the inner picture is peace, the person has a better chance of listening before reacting. The relationship chapter is not only about romance. It is about the emotional atmosphere a person brings into human contact. Picture someone who wants a better relationship, but silently expects betrayal in every pause, every delayed reply, and every tired expression. What happens next if that expectation leads every conversation? What really happens is that the fear becomes a filter. Neutral moments begin to look like evidence, and the relationship receives suspicion instead of presence. Murphy's point is not that trust should be blind. It is that the subconscious can turn old pain into a lens that distorts the present. This is where forgiveness becomes central. Forgiveness in this book does not mean approving harm. It does not mean returning to unsafe people or pretending that injustice was acceptable. Murphy's useful point is that resentment keeps the injury alive inside the person who carries it. The offender may be absent, but the mind continues replaying the scene. The body continues receiving the emotional command. The future is asked to kneel before the past. Forgiveness, in Murphy's practical sense, means withdrawing that command. He describes forgiveness as love in action, but a modern reader can define it carefully. I release the demand that this injury keep directing my nervous system, my imagination, and my identity. I can remember wisely without rehearsing bitterness as my future. I can set boundaries without making resentment my home. This is not sentimental. It is one of the strongest psychological ideas in the book. The subconscious learns from repetition, and resentment is repetition with fire. What would happen if a person replayed an old insult every night for 10 years? The actual result would be that the insult becomes more than a memory. It becomes a practiced identity. Murphy's forgiveness method asks the reader to stop making the wound the central image. Replace the scene with release, peace, and a wish for freedom. That may feel impossible at first, but even the willingness to stop rehearsing the injury is a new instruction to the subconscious. The chapters on happiness also belong here. Murphy does not define happiness as constant pleasure. He treats happiness as a habit of mental direction. People become unhappy when they wait for the world to give them permission to think peacefully. Murphy reverses the order. Choose the inner climate first, then act from it. This can sound too simple, but it has a useful edge. Many people postpone peace until every condition is perfect. Murphy says the subconscious can be trained toward peace before the conditions are perfect. A person may object. Does that mean ignoring grief, injustice, exhaustion, or real pressure? No. The better reading is that inner direction is not the denial of pain. It is the refusal to let pain become the only instruction. Imagine pressure as the loudest voice. What would you expect if it becomes the only voice? The result is captivity to one emotional channel. You can grieve and still choose not to rehearse despair as identity. You can face pressure and still choose not to predict defeat. You could be angry at injustice and still choose action instead of endless inner poisoning. Murphy sometimes overstates the ease of this, but the discipline itself is valuable. Fear receives one of Murphy's strongest practical treatments. He calls fear a thought in the mind, accepted as true. That definition does not make fear fake. It means fear grows when the mind gives it authority. Fear of failure, fear of public speaking, fear of water, fear of closed spaces, fear of old age, fear of rejection. In each case, Murphy's method is to replace the fear picture with an image of calm action. The subconscious can learn courage the same way it learned alarm, by repetition joined with feeling. Imagine a fear situation before an interview, exam, speech, or difficult conversation. What do you think happens if the person rehearses failure 10 times before acting? The result is that the body enters the event already trained for alarm. So Murphy asked for a new rehearsal. See yourself entering calmly. Hear yourself speaking clearly. Feel the relief of completion. Repeat it until the body has another path available. Then take the action. The point is not to wait until fear disappears. The point is to give the subconscious a stronger picture than fear. Murphy's fear method has 3 practical steps. First, Name the fear instead of letting it float as a vague cloud. Second, relax the body because a tense body keeps telling the subconscious that danger is present. Third, substitute the constructive image. If the fear is speaking, imagine speaking well. If the fear is travel, imagine arriving safely. If the fear is rejection, imagine remaining steady and dignified no matter the answer. This is mental exposure through imagination, joined with spiritual confidence. The book also talks about failure. Murphy argues that fear of failure often causes the very behavior that looks like failure. A student who fears forgetting may freeze. A speaker who fears judgment may rush. A worker who fears criticism may avoid the task until the deadline becomes dangerous. The subconscious follows the practice picture. If the practice picture is collapse, the person enters the situation partly collapsed already. Murphy wants the reader to rehearse successful completion before the event. This connects to a wider idea. The subconscious does not understand sarcasm, self-contempt, and dramatic exaggeration as harmless entertainment. If a person constantly says, "I am terrible at this, nothing works for me," or "I always ruin things," the mind may begin treating those lines as instruction. Murphy's advice is to stop using the self as a target. Speak inwardly as if the subconscious is listening, because in his view it always is. Even if you treat that as metaphor, it is a useful rule. Now imagine a person who has repeated, "I am too old to begin," for years. What would you expect that sentence to do to curiosity, posture, and daily courage? The actual result is not a birthday causing defeat. The repeated picture quietly trains withdrawal before life has finished offering useful work. The final chapters on aging bring the book's philosophy into a long view of life. Murphy argues that age is not only a number of years, but also an accepted mental picture. He does not deny the body. He does not make time irrelevant. But he strongly rejects the idea that a person must accept uselessness, bitterness, and decline as identity. The subconscious can be impressed with renewal, service, curiosity, and continuing value. A person who says, "My best contribution is over," may stop contributing before life actually requires it. Scientists today understand aging in more complex ways than Murphy's simple spiritual language. Still, his practical challenge remains alive. What picture of later life are you rehearsing? If old age means only fear, narrowing, and loss, the person may withdraw from learning, friendship, creativity, and service. If later life means wisdom, blessing, mentorship, study, and spiritual depth, the person gives the mind a living assignment. Murphy's point is not youth worship. It is inner renewal. This is one reason the book has lasted. It gives readers a lever they can use privately. You may not control every event, every economy, every diagnosis, every family wound, every public opinion, or every other person's response. But you can often control the sentence you repeat, the image you feed before sleep, the way you pray, the assumption you carry into a room, and the meaning you give to a setback. Suppose difficulty meets 2 rehearsals. "I am finished," or "one right action remains." Which would you expect to help? The result is better participation. Murphy's world can be too certain, but the usable core is strong. The mind is a participant in life. The strongest way to read the book is neither blind belief nor cynical dismissal. Blind belief turns every claim into a miracle formula and may ignore real-world action. Cynical dismissal misses the practical psychology under the religious language. The middle reading is better. Repeated emotional thought shapes attention, behavior, confidence, stress, relationships, and persistence. Prayer, affirmation, visualization, forgiveness, and sleep practice can be tools for training that inner direction. But they must be joined to action, ethics, medical care when needed, skill, patience, and humility. This middle reading also clarifies the book's limitations. Murphy often uses success stories without the kind of evidence a modern nonfiction reader would expect. He sometimes writes as if the subconscious is an all-powerful machine that only needs the right command. Real life is messy. People have histories, bodies, communities, constraints, and responsibilities. Not every problem is solved by changing a sentence, but many problems become heavier because of the sentence we keep repeating. That is where the book earns attention. So what should a reader actually do after finishing it? Start small. Choose one repeated negative instruction that clearly affects behavior. Maybe it is, I always fail under pressure. Maybe it is, I cannot sleep unless I solve everything tonight. Maybe it is, people will reject me. Maybe it is, money never stays with me. Imagine a reader writing that sentence instead of letting it run invisibly. What would you expect to change first? The result is not the whole life. It is the first point of choice. Write the sentence down. Then write a constructive replacement that is believable enough to practice. I can prepare and respond one step at a time. I can give this problem to sleep and return with a clearer mind. I can meet people with steadiness instead of suspicion. I can learn to serve, manage, and receive wisely. Then practice the replacement when the subconscious is most impressionable, after waking, before sleep, and during emotional triggers. Do not scream it at yourself. Do not use it as a weapon. Repeat it calmly. Give a picture. Pair it with one action. If the thought is about courage, take one courageous step. If it is about forgiveness, stop one replay. If it is about prosperity, do one useful piece of work. If it is about health, cooperate with one responsible habit or professional instruction. This is where Murphy's spiritual method becomes daily training. Another major part of the book is Murphy's insistence that the subconscious responds to mental pictures more easily than abstract wishes. A vague wish says, I want things to be better. A picture says, here is the direction. This matters because people often try to change their life while leaving the old picture intact. They want confidence, but still picture themselves shrinking. They want reconciliation, but still picture the other person as an enemy. They want prosperity, but still picture money as danger. Murphy's method asks the reader to make the new picture specific enough that the deeper mind can practice it. A useful test is this. If your subconscious had to act on the image you rehearsed most today, what would it prepare you for? Would it prepare you for courage or for defense? Would it prepare you for service or for resentment? Would it prepare you for learning or for avoidance? Imagine a reader asking after stress. What would you expect the audit to reveal? The result is the dominant rehearsal. This question turns Murphy's spiritual language into a daily audit. The point is not to police every passing thought. The point is to notice the repeated emotional instruction, because repetition is what gives a thought weight. Murphy also treats the subconscious as a source of memory and problem-solving. His chapter about scientists using the subconscious mind argues that creative answers often appear after a period of intense attention followed by release. The scientist studies the facts, holds the problem, then lets the deeper mind connect patterns. Whether the example is invention, research, or artistic insight, Murphy's lesson is that the conscious mind gathers and directs, while the subconscious can combine and reveal. This is not laziness. The subconscious works best when the conscious mind has first supplied real material. That distinction protects the book from a common misunderstanding. Murphy is not at his strongest when he makes the subconscious sound like a vending machine for miracles. He is stronger when he shows a partnership. The conscious mind studies, chooses, rejects false suggestions, and gives direction. The subconscious mind stores, associates, automates and responds. A person who wants an answer should not merely repeat, "The answer is mine," while refusing to learn. A person should study the problem, ask clearly, relax deeply, and remain alert for the answer that emerges. Imagine a person facing a complicated decision. They spend all day panicking, then demand instant guidance at night. What would you expect the mind to return? Most likely more noise. Now imagine the same person writes the facts, names the fear, asks for the wisest next step, and goes to sleep without trying to force the answer. The actual result may be a calmer morning, a remembered detail, a new question, or the courage to ask someone qualified. Murphy would call that subconscious guidance. A modern reader can call it rested intelligence. The book's repeated summaries at the end of chapters are important because they show Murphy's teaching style. He does not want the reader to admire the concept and move on. He wants practice. The repeated instruction is to feed the mind deliberately, avoid negative declarations, use prayers scientifically, accept the feeling of the wish fulfilled, and trust the deeper process after giving a direction. Even when the language feels old-fashioned, the habit is clear. Choose the inner statement you are willing to become familiar with. Murphy's chapter on success makes this concrete. He argues that success is not only ambition, talent, or luck. It is also the habitual direction of desire. A person succeeds when a conscious desire, subconscious belief, and repeated action begin to point in the same direction. If a person says they want to write, build, teach, serve, or lead, but privately repeats that they are unworthy, late, unlucky, and unwanted, the inner contradiction drains energy. Murphy wants the person to imagine the successful service first, then act with the steadiness of someone who is allowed to contribute. Imagine a person picturing useful service every morning and then taking one concrete step that matched it. What would you expect to happen? The result would not be instant fame. It would be alignment. The mind would begin looking for tools, teachers, chances, and corrections that fit the picture. The person would notice feedback instead of treating it only as insult. The person would return after mistakes because the identity is no longer "I am defeated," but "I am learning to serve well." That is a realistic version of Murphy's success doctrine. He also warns against mental coercion. Prayer is not supposed to force another person to act according to your private demand. This matters in relationships and business. If the subconscious method becomes a way of trying to control others, it has lost its ethical center. The better prayer is for harmony, wisdom, right action, and mutual good. Instead of picturing another person's well-being bent, picture yourself acting with clarity, respect, courage, and peace. Murphy's best teaching is not manipulation. It is self-direction under a larger moral order. This moral order appears in his repeated use of words like harmony, peace, love, right action, and divine order. Even readers who do not share Murphy's theology can understand the function of those words. They keep the method from becoming raw appetite. The subconscious should not be programmed merely for ego victory. It should be impressed with constructive ends. If the desired outcome requires dishonesty, exploitation, or contempt, it is not the kind of mental picture Murphy's better principles support. The book's teaching on marriage and partnership also depends on inner speech. Murphy says not to discuss marital troubles with every friend and relative because repeated complaint deepens the groove. A cautious reader can add nuance. People in unsafe situations need support and may need outside help. But for ordinary resentment and friction, the warning is useful. If a person repeats only the partner's faults, the subconscious receives a portrait of the partner as enemy. The next conversation begins inside that portrait. A better practice is not denial, but replacement of the dominant frame. Instead of rehearsing, "They never listen," the person may rehearse, "I can speak clearly and listen for what is true." Instead of rehearsing, This relationship is hopeless. The person may rehearse. I can bring honesty, calm, and wise boundaries into this conversation. Imagine a person entering the same conversation with that new frame. What would you expect to change first? The result is usually tone before outcome. The outer issue may still need practical action, but the inner rehearsal stops, poisoning the action before it begins. Murphy's relationship advice is strongest when it changes the person from reactive to deliberate. The forgiveness chapter deepens this, because forgiveness is the emotional version of changing the dominant frame. If I keep rehearsing an injury, I am repeatedly giving the subconscious the same instruction. Stay hurt, stay armed, stay defined by this. If I forgive wisely, I give a different instruction. Learn, protect what must be protected, but do not keep drinking the old bitterness. This is why Murphy connects forgiveness to healing. Not because every disease is resentment, but because unresolved hostility can keep the mind and body in a state of alarm. Imagine the person who hurt you never apologizes. What would you expect if your inner freedom depends entirely on their confession? The result is continued captivity to their action. Murphy's answer would still be that your inner freedom cannot depend entirely on their confession. That does not erase justice, boundaries, or memory. It means you stop letting their action become the main author of your inner life. A practical forgiveness statement might be, I release this person to the law of life, and I release myself from rehearsing the injury as my identity. Whether or not the other person changes, the subconscious receives a new command. The fear chapters are also practical because Murphy names common fears instead of leaving fear abstract. Stage fright, exam fear, fear of failure, fear of water, fear of closed spaces, fear of old age. Each fear has a mental movie. The person sees the embarrassing moment, the drowning, the locked room, the collapse, the useless future. Picture stage fright as an overplayed film. What would you expect if the person rehearses a different film? The result is a second pathway. Murphy's method is to replace the movie before the event. This is not childish fantasy. It is rehearsal. Athletes, speakers, and performers understand that the body follows practiced images. But Murphy's method also requires exposure to life. If a person only imagines courage and never acts, the fear remains protected. Imagine that person rehearses calm, but avoids the room. What would you expect to happen? The result is private comfort, not new evidence. After the calm picture, take a small step. Speak one sentence. Enter the room. Make the call. Practice in shallow water with support. Ask the question. The image prepares the nervous system. Action teaches it that survival is possible. Without action, the method risks becoming private comfort. With action, it becomes training. Murphy's chapters on age and renewal finish the book with a broad spiritual claim. Life continues to ask for expression. He resists the cultural suggestion that later life is only decline. The subconscious, he argues, should be filled with expectancy, usefulness, and divine life, not fear of endings. A modern reader can accept this as psychological wisdom even without accepting every metaphysical claim. People often live down to the picture society gives them. If the picture of age is uselessness, the person may shrink too early. If the picture is contribution, the person may keep learning. This idea applies before old age too. Many people become old in spirit while young in years because they repeatedly tell themselves that nothing new is possible. Murphy's answer is renewal of inner expectation. Imagine a young person living under that old sentence. What would you expect renewal to require? The result is a future-facing assignment, not a record of disappointments. Read, learn, bless others, practice gratitude. Imagine yourself useful. Expect guidance. Offer service. These are not merely religious phrases. They are antidotes to inner stagnation. The subconscious needs a future-facing assignment, not only a record of disappointments. The complete movement of the book is now visible. It begins with the claim that habitual thinking and imagery shape destiny. It explains the conscious and subconscious minds. It teaches prayer as inner agreement. It uses autosuggestion to replace destructive feeling tones. It applies the method to healing with necessary caution. It uses sleep as a doorway into deeper acceptance and problem solving. It applies the method to prosperity, success, partnership, forgiveness, fear, and aging. The same question follows every chapter. What idea are you accepting as law inside yourself? That question is why the book can still help even readers who reject parts of its certainty. You do not need to believe every miracle story to see that repeated inner defeat changes behavior. You do not need to accept every healing claim to see that fear and despair can sabotage recovery. You do not need to think affirmations create money by themselves to see that a scarcity identity can reduce courage and service. You do not need to share Murphy's theology to understand that the mind needs a constructive command. Picture the reader reaching the end and choosing one sentence to repeat before sleep tonight. Would you expect one night to repair an entire life? The actual result is smaller and more honest. One clear sentence becomes the first interruption in an old pattern, and repeated interruptions become a new direction. The best practical summary of Murphy's method is this: guard the gate, choose the seed, feel the image, release the demand, and act in harmony. Guard the gate means do not accept every fear or insult as truth. Choose the seed means select the idea you want repeated. Feel the image means let the idea become emotionally believable. Release the demand means stop digging it up in panic. Act in harmony means take the next practical step that matches the inner direction. Without those 5 moves, the book becomes vague positivity. With them, it becomes a disciplined mental practice. There is also a final caution about language. Murphy's phrases can sound absolute. Infinite riches, perfect health, miracle power. A responsible reader should translate them into grounded practice. Use strong inner language to build courage, but do not use it to deny reality. Use prayer to calm and direct the mind, but do not use it to avoid responsibility. Use imagination to rehearse constructive action, but do not confuse rehearsal with completion. Use forgiveness to free yourself, but do not use it to excuse repeated harm. At its best, The Power of Your Subconscious Mind is a book about stewardship of the inner life. It says your private senses are not private in their effects. They become tone, posture, attention, choice, patience, and courage. They influence how you sleep, how you speak, how you recover, how you work, how you forgive, and how you age. The subconscious is not treated as a decorative idea. It is the workshop where repeated impressions become automatic tendencies. So the book's final challenge is not, can you force the universe to obey you? That is the shallow reading. Imagine a reader choosing between control and stewardship. What would you expect the better reading to produce? The result is not domination of life, but cleaner inner instruction. The better challenge is, can you stop giving your deeper mind instructions you do not want your life to follow? Can you stop rehearsing defeat and begin rehearsing right action? Can you stop watering resentment and begin watering peace? Can you stop treating fear as prophecy and begin treating courage as practice? That is the version of Murphy's book that remains useful. The opening question now returns with more weight. Were you rehearsing inside yourself every day? If the answer is fear, resentment, shame, lack, or helplessness, Murphy's book says the first work is invisible but not small. Choose the constructive idea. Make it clear. Feel it quietly. Repeat it when the old reflex returns. Act as someone who is cooperating with that new instruction. The larger lesson is that the subconscious mind is shaped by the thoughts we emotionally accept, and daily inner practice can change the direction of outer behavior. The practical takeaway is simple. Do not let the most repeated sentence in your mind be the one that defeats you. Let the final line be a question you can carry tonight. If your deeper mind follows your repeated picture, what picture deserves to be repeated?